Alright, we are back with a new video. Today's video is slightly different than usual, in that it's neither a ranking or a straight up review. I simply wanted to discuss my thoughts on G5 of My Little Pony. I know it's weird that since bringing back this channel about a year ago, I've made multiple videos about G4 of MLP, and to be clear, I will continue kind of covering G4 moving forward, and yet I haven't really talked about G5 at all. I couldn't blame anyone for thinking I simply haven't kept up or wish it didn't exist, but I have been keeping up with it, and I'm actually looking forward to the Make Your Mark series coming out in a few weeks. I think G5 has potential and should be given a chance. However, I'd be lying if I said I have been struggling to connect with it so far, and I think a lot of that stems from a rollout, which I do have issues with. I mean, to me, the Make Your Mark series will be the meat of this generation, and how I'll be assessing it, much like how Friendship is Magic was to G4. But the fact that we haven't gotten it, despite it being a year since a new generation came out, means I haven't had many opportunities to connect with the characters or seriously evaluate what we've gotten so far. And honestly, that's a big reason why I haven't made videos about it up until now. Now, I will be including mini reviews for the stuff we have gotten so far, but I'm hoping this video will be a more comprehensive overview on G5 and where I feel like things stand on it so far. So let's dive right in. First up, I wanted to talk a bit about the overall concept of G5, like the setting and the characters. Now, obviously, the biggest point of contention here is the fact that it's in the same universe as G4, only set in the distant future. Now, I understand where a lot of people are coming from with this. I mean, for one, it theoretically makes it harder for G5 to stand on its own and makes it more likely to rely upon references to G4. Now, while I can get behind this fear, I feel like outside New Generation and the comics, G5 hasn't exactly leaned into the member berries. The series is set far enough into the future to where any traces of G4 are few and far between. Now, obviously, we could end up seeing more references in the series, but even then, I don't think they'll necessarily bring it down. And I've also heard people say that this retroactively ruins G4, running all the struggles and triumphs of the main six meaningless in the long term. Now, this one I get a bit more. I mean, it's kind of an issue with stuff like the Star Wars sequel trilogy, where we saw the fall of the Empire simply give way to the First Order. But again, I feel like the sheer amount of time between G4 and G5 makes change inevitable, but it also makes it easier to bear. It's simply a reality that over time, nations rise and fall, people come and go, and history moves forward. And while we don't necessarily need to be forgotten, time makes it harder to remember. One of my favorite scenes from a new generation is when they're at the train station and they're seeing all these old artifacts like Twilight's cutie mark on the window and the Wonderbolts poster, and heck, even some of the postcards of Maritime Bay and Bridalwood. I mean, it's stuff like that. I'm kind of a sucker for it, but I feel like it really contributes to the show's world building. Almost like they're living in this post apocalyptic world, kind of like what we see in Adventure Time, for example. Now, with all that said, I kind of hope they don't give a full on backstory that traces the racism and segregation to stuff that happened in the main six lifetime. Now, admittedly, the backstory we got in issue 2 of the comics and the Alicorn antagonist we saw at the end of the Make Your Mark pilot do worry me a bit, and I feel like we could end up getting that anyway. But the way I see it, G5 is separate enough from G4 to where it's not exactly standing on its shoulders, but still has enough connection to make moments like that train station scene kind of special. So, really, while I understand why people have issue with it being in the same universe as G4, I personally don't find it to be much of a problem. And actually, I think there could be some potential here. So, I do kind of like the direction that they're going in here with the universe. Now, as for the characters, I mean, I already said that I haven't connected with them to the same degree as the main six. Some of that is to be expected given that we just haven't gotten too much of them so far. But I also feel like to some degree, I haven't really attached myself to them, and I feel like they don't really stick to my mind quite as much. I mean, they're fine. I mean, I do kind of enjoy seeing Sunny being this naive activist during a lot of New Generation. I mean, Zip is probably my favorite of the group so far, but even then, like, I wasn't a huge fan of the direction they were taking her in during a Make Your Mark pilot where they're trying to make her this detective. So, I mean, not a huge fan of that. Pip is fine. I mean, I wasn't a huge fan of the whole social media influencer route they were going with her, but I've actually kind of grown attached to her over the course of Tell Your Tale, where I feel like she has kind of latched onto me to a degree, but even then, like I've seen this archetype, like before in some recent shows, so not the biggest fan. I mean, Izzy is probably the closest to Pinky in my opinion, and they're definitely taking some inspiration from her. But I still feel like she hasn't gotten quite enough screen time to where she really sticks out to any notable degree. And I feel like the Maker Mark pilot didn't really do her much favor, so there's that. And then there's Hitch, who like is kind of the most normal one there. I mean, they are kind of going for him being this not super effective like cop for a lot of it, which is kind of weird because in a new generation they kind of made a deal about how he's Mr. Popular and how that sort of inspired Sprout to try to make a name for himself. But really, ever since then, like they kind of lean more into him being kind of a pushover, not really willing to arrest anyone or really lay down the law. Plus, there's attachment to animals, so I guess there's that. But at the end of the day, I feel like this cast is definitely one that has some potential, but I feel like off the top of my head, they don't really stick to my mind too much. And another interesting aspect to them is the fact that none of the voice actors that they had from the movie are here on the Make Your Mark series, which I do find to be a problem here. Now, I kind of get it in that they were somewhat more notable names that they went for the movie, which I guess was their way of trying to get people excited for the movie in G5, but I feel like it was a mistake to have all these like bigger names that they couldn't possibly retain for the series being cast in these main roles to the point where they had to replace almost everyone here. Now I know that this isn't the first time that they did this. Like off the top of my head, I remember in Barnyard they cast Kevin James as Otis, but then for the series they cast some other guy. But I do find it to be a problem when they're casting these names that they can't get for the series into these main roles because I find it harder for me to really latch on to these voice actors to their respective characters, which is something that I kind of do when I'm getting involved with the series. I like to look up the voice actors and sort of visualize them in their different roles across the series. I mean, G4 was a perfect example of that. But here, I mean, the fact that there isn't much carryover and there isn't much attachment between the voice actors and the characters, like not only takes that fun aspect away from it, but it also makes it harder for me to visualize what the characters even sound like, to where obviously they had different voices between the movie and the show, which does in turn contribute to it making it harder to connect to them when I can't even have a consistent voice for them in my head. So I feel like that was something that was interesting as well. Now, again, I do understand why like they don't have those same voice actors there, but I feel like if they really wanted to like help me to build a connection to these characters, they probably should have gone with whatever actors they were getting for the series and then just cast them in the movie. And if they still wanted to have some celebrity guest stars, they could have just had them be like one-off characters, kind of like what they did in the 2017 movie. But I mean, all in all, I do find that to be a bit of a misstep. But on the whole, I feel like the characters are fine enough, and I am expecting to grow a more solid opinion of them as the series starts and we start to see more of them in action. But for now, I am just kind of whatever on the characters. Now, I want to talk a bit about the content that we have gone so far, namely A New Generation and the Make Your Mark pilot. Now, I was planning to make these separate videos to like break down my overall thoughts in a more review format. But considering that I wanted to share my more general thoughts on G5 and talk about these broader concepts about each of them, I figured it was probably best to make this all one video, so take that as you will. Now, as for A New Generation, I thought it was fine. I actually don't mind the concept that Equestria has devolved into these hostile ethno-states, each using racist stereotypes and fear-mongering to keep their society safe and pure. Now, while this is a retread of stuff we saw in Ending of the End and begs the question of what happened to the Wendigos, I don't inherently have an issue with this premise. Now, with that said, I do take some issue with the execution of its themes, where, for one, I think a lot of Sprout and Phyllis's storyline is too on the nose with the fear-mongering. We learn at the beginning that the slogan of Canterlogic, Phyllis's company, is "To be scared is to be prepared." Yeah, that's subtle. Then we get to the Danger Danger song, which, aside from being the worst song in the movie, really beats you over the head with Sprout using fear as a tactic and getting everyone to stop using their brains and blindly following him. And from that comes the whole Emperor Sprout stick to wage war on the other pony nations, which I didn't find that amusing at the end of the day. It was just kind of whatever. These aren't the worst ideas in the world for a story like this, but the fact that at least nothing to interpretation is kind of annoying. Now, the other thing is more so of a missed opportunity than an issue, but I don't like the scene where Sunny is getting to know Izzy. Like, I get the point of the scene is to show Sunny's excitement at finally meeting a unicorn and is desperate to learn as much as she can, but she comes off as really naive and insensitive here. She tells Izzy to her face to not point her horn at her, and that Izzy has been reading her mind. She then bombards Izzy with a whole bunch of questions ranging from really personal stuff to kind of racist stuff, like whether unicorns can fry pony brains with a single horn snap. Now, like, I'm pretty sure that if a white person who had never met a black person before came up to a black person and acted this way, that the black person would be deeply offended and that the white person can only hope to be forgiven for their ignorance. And yet, Izzy just rolls with it. Though, to be fair, Izzy isn't exactly better, and the movie never really acknowledges this faux pas per se. I mean, to me, I feel like that scene could have addressed Sunny's naivete, which comes through in her activism with the Earth Ponies early on, acknowledged the flaws in her worldview, which stem from her society's isolation from other cultures, and encourage her to see Izzy as a pony first, rather than a representative of some quote unquote exotic culture, or at the very least make her come off as more sensitive than, well, this. On a technical note, I also think the movie has some pacing issues. Like, going back to the Emperor Sprout storyline, I feel like it got really little screen time considering he ends up being the main antagonist by the end of it. Like, we get that one scene of him consolidating his power through the Danger Danger song, one scene of him building his weapon while Phyllis makes these comments about him going overboard, like kind of implying that she's starting to see the error of his ways. And we get some like glimpses of the ponies not really knowing what they're getting into, like by them like not knowing how to build a machine. And then we don't see them again until the climax. And despite me thinking that storyline was beaten over your head, I find the lack of screen time to be an issue here. I also think in general, the entire third act was rushed, where we see Sunny losing hope after putting the Pegasus and Unicorn crystals together, like, and that doesn't work. She emotes for a bit, she packs away all her stuff, and then she finds the third crystal, and then immediately we get to the climax, and then we just see the other ponies catch up to her, and then when Green Haven shows up, she's like, I know you're upset, but it's time to go home. It's like there was supposed to be a scene after Sunny left when we see Zip and Pip realize they needed to help Sunny, and they just ran off without Haven's permission here, but yet all these characters just show up in Maritime Bay, so I found that to be kind of wonky. But despite those issues, I do still find myself enjoying this movie quite a bit, where I did find the songs mostly enjoyable. Now, I know people have said that this generation has been going for a more pop style in terms of its musical numbers, and while we have yet to see too much outside of obviously this, but obviously the other stuff that we've gotten, I don't actually mind the songs for the most part, where aside from the Danger Danger song, the only issue I really have is with the Fit Right In song, but even then, that's because it has the same name as a G4 song, like from She's All Yak, which I do like as well, but every time I try to look it up on YouTube, I get the G5 version instead of the G4 version, so I did find that a bit annoying, but for the most part, the songs are pretty good. And again, I do appreciate what the story was going for here, even if it didn't really have the time or the space to properly explore all of its ideas, and I did find the ending pretty rushed. I did walk away from A New Generation feeling like it had a lot of potential for whatever came next. So on the whole, I did find myself enjoying New Generation. But then we jump to the Make Your Mark pilot, which I was more conflicted on. I think the most glaring thing about it is the animation, which sucks. The movement's really janky, like when the Pegasus are flying, the colors and lighting aren't right, the way their mouths move is weird, which, especially given the fact that they have pretty human like teeth, like it just makes it look really off. And a lot of the textures just look plastic, especially the dragon character towards the end. Like, that doesn't look very good. It just kind of looked like someone vomited on the screen. There's a lot of points where the animation just straight up looks unfinished. Now, I get that they have a smart budget and that this isn't the first show that went from CG movie to CG show, but this was kind of my fear with making G5 CG to begin with. While I thought the animation in A New Generation was pretty good, I had a feeling it wouldn't hold up when it came time for the show and its smaller budget. It's much harder to make CG look good on a small budget than 2D. Pretty much all the good G5 fan art I come across so far has been in 2D, and it looks way better than this. Now, admittedly, the animation itself isn't a deal breaker, but I thought I should make it clear that this is not good. Like, at all. Now, similar to A New Generation, I do think this has some good ideas as well regarding its racial and social progress themes. I like the idea that we see the other races trying to coexist in the same setting, only for them to run into issues with each other. Like, yes, the I accept Pegasi, but why they have to fly all the time, or why can't the unicorns just not use their magic? I do find that aspect to be pretty interesting, and especially after A New Generation had a pretty rushed ending where we saw everyone be pretty happy to have their new abilities back, but like that's just me. And I kind of appreciate that they were going for this more slow burn approach where obviously we saw the problems early on, but then we see them slowly build up as the tensions slowly rise until eventually it gets to the climax, which I'll get into a moment there. So I do think it has some good ideas and I do appreciate the effort. However, I feel like it comes at the expense of making the rest of the special feel kind of boring, where again, they wanted to go for this more slow burn approach to where most of the special before the Maritime Day event is pretty boring, where we see like a lot of the main cast just going about their business, trying to figure out what's going on. We also have Detective Zip showing up where she's trying to avoid moving back to Zephyr Heights to do some princess stuff, but like there's that. We have Hitch finding the dragon egg and trying to protect it until it hatches, which whatever. And then we get to the actual Maritime Bay event where we see a lot of the tension boil over, where we're seeing them trying to integrate all the stuff that the unicorns and Pegasi are doing, only for that to be unappreciated and for the Earth ponies to not really be on board with it. Now, one problem I kind of have with the special is that it seems to pin most of the blame for the increased tension on the Earth ponies, where obviously we see early on that despite the crystals coming together at the end of A New Generation, that the Earth ponies didn't get their magic and that they're still seen as these ponies that are pretty basic compared to the Pegasi and unicorns, which aside from contradicting stuff we've heard in G4, where we know that the Earth ponies have this connection to the Earth, which explains why they're good at growing crops. I mean, I do find that kind of weird that we see A New Generation end by giving the unicorns and Pegasi their special abilities, but the Earth ponies are still kind of left behind. And while I do get why that would make the Earth ponies kind of resentful of that, it still kind of strikes me that the crystals didn't give the Earth ponies their powers immediately upon restoring it to the others. Like, we know that it took all three crystals in order to restore the power to everyone. And yes, while the power is dependent upon friendship here, wouldn't the Earth ponies not having their magic be a weird defect of that? So I did find that aspect kind of weird, and obviously a lot of the blame does fall on the Earth ponies here for increasing the tension to the point where by the end they're the ones who kind of have to come around to helping the unicorns and Pegasi in order to resolve the eventual conflict here. Speaking of which, we get to the climax where a lot of the tension boils over to the point where not only do the unicorns and Pegasi lose their abilities per se, but we get this weird chasm opening up in the ground. Again, we have ponies falling into it, into this endless void here. And I did find that aspect a bit weird as well, where obviously it's supposed to be a stand in for how all this division is bad and that it leads to evil, kind of similar to what we had with the Wendigos during G4. But it's sort of weird how we see the society existing for who knows how long in this state where the ponies aren't getting along and not really living by the rules of friendship. And it is enough to take away their magic, but not enough to create this weird void or bring about the end of the world. So to see that all come back only for them to have this bigger consequence when they inevitably return to this nature that they've been used for decades. Like, where was this chasm during all those years in which the pony societies were separated? Like, does it have to come back at this moment where the ponies were at a heightened level of friendship, only to go back down to a level that they were probably at beforehand? Like, I did find that aspect to be a bit weird as well. And obviously, it's sort of implied that the Alicorn character we saw at the end of the special could explain that to a degree. But I mean, I guess we'll have to see when the series comes around. But I did find that to be a pretty weird climax. And on the whole, considering how wonky the pacing is, like, I did find the resolution here to again be a bit rushed, where it felt like the chasm came out of nowhere. And then Sunny was pretty quick to resolve it once she saw the rest of the main cast helping the unicorns and Pegasi, and obviously she jumps into the void to rescue Posey here. And of course, all is well at the end and stuff like that. But on the whole, I did find it's to be a step down from a new generation where, I mean, aside from the animation being vastly inferior, I did find there to be a bit more issues in terms of the pacing, in terms of the actual story, and my overall entertainment with the concept coming into it. Now, again, I am still hoping that future episodes will explain certain things that we got in this pilot, but on the whole, I just found this pilot to be kind of okay at the end of the day. Now, outside that, we also have the Tell Your Tale series as well as the comics that have been trickling in. And I have been watching them to a degree. However, honestly, I don't have that great of an opinion on them. I mean, Tell Your Tale is fine for what it is. I mean, I do find some of the shorts themselves to be pretty interesting. But on the whole, I do find it to be kind of similar to Pony Life, where I feel like too often the stories are too short to really leave much of an impression on me. And considering my overall disposition that the Make Your Mark series will be the meat of the generation, I can't find myself using that to really evaluate this generation too much. And yes, while they're pretty good, I mean, the fact that they are only 5 minutes doesn't really give me too much of a chance to connect with it super well. And then the comics, I mean, I haven't been a massive comics person when it comes to MLP, but I do find some of the early editions to be somewhat interesting, particularly issue 2, which did have Discord in it, and we did get a bit of a backstory in terms of where the crystals came from. Now, whether the Make Your Mark series will use this backstory to explain the crystals will be left for debate. I mean, I kind of hope that it does. I mean, for the sake of continuity and consistency. But I do also find myself a bit underwhelmed by the fact that Twilight was the one to create the crystals in the first place, and is sort of the reason that the G5 universe is in the state where it is, to where the unicorn, Pegasi, and Earth Pony magic is all centered around these material artifacts that can easily be like separated, broken, stolen, whatever. You know, I know I made that April Fool's video a while back about how Twiley ended up ruining Equestria for everyone, but this backstory kind of gives some credibility to that. I mean, considering the fact that the crystals arguably make the well-being of ponies worse, in that it weakens their ability to use these critical parts of their, I guess, identities per se, is a problem at the end of the day. But I get, again, we'll have to see how much that really factors into the show here. So that's everything I had to say about G5 so far, at least. Now, again, I know it's been pretty much a year since the new generation came out, and obviously this is all that we have of it up to this point. But at this point, we're obviously going to start getting the series, and through that, we're going to get quite a bit of new content, which I am pretty excited to cover. And even though I haven't really solidified an opinion on G5 yet due to that, I do still feel like G5 has a lot of potential, and there is stuff that I do enjoy about it. Now, I know there's a number of people online who are kind of on extreme ends of the spectrum here, where on one hand, you have people who absolutely hate it. They feel like it's vastly inferior to G4 and that they wish they had the good old days back. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are ardently defending it and are pretty much pushing back against most criticism of G5, you know, like in saying that anyone who complains about G5 is trying to unfairly compare it to G4 here. And honestly, I'm just kind of in the middle at this point, where I do like G5. I do like some of the stuff that it's presented so far, and I do feel like it has potential. But I also feel like there are still plenty of issues with the stuff that we have so far, both in terms of how they've been releasing stuff, but also the stuff that they have released on its own, to where I feel comfortable talking about those issues as well. But on the whole, I feel like I'm going to be reserving my judgment of G5 to when the series comes out. And I kind of wanted to wait until shortly before the series came out to really release this video to kind of give my state of things coming into it, because I know it's going to be something that's talked about within the fandom once it comes out. And again, I'll be talking about it too. I actually plan to make content about G5 more as the series is coming out. So I guess that's a bit of a plug for that. But that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out with the channel. And again, I'll be back making my more usual content moving forward. And again, I'll probably do reviews of G5 episodes as they come out, but we'll see what happens with that. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server. I'll leave a link to join in the description. A lot of stuff over there. But for now, that's the video. See ya.